Hi there, my name is Dr. Umesh Jagtap, Assistant Professor, Department of Botany, Government Vidarbha Institute of Science and Humanities, Amravati. So, in today's lecture, we are going to deal with a new topic known as the stress physiology. So, before going to deal with that is the stress physiology, we were to start by defining the key terminologies into which were used while studying that is the stress physiology. Because if terminology is not correct, then what is said cannot be followed. And if what is said cannot be followed, then work cannot be accomplished. So, if you want to understand any topic thoroughly, then you have to must be understand that is a understand clearly the key terminologies or the key terms which are were used into that particular subject or that topic. So we were starts with the key terminologies which were frequently encountered in this particular stress physiology. So first, that is what is stress. While dealing with the stress, the first question comes in: what is meant by the stress? So Buchanan et al. In 2000 defined stress as external conditions that adversely affect growth, development, or the productivity of particular plant. So external conditions. So what are these external conditions? External conditions, that is a plant's will be sessile organisms, and it cannot be run away from one or move away from one place to the another place. So the plant is constantly exposed to the varying conditions of and the temperature, light, water. Then there are the again it can be attacked by the number of uh, pathogens, insects. So plants are continuously exposed to such type of the external conditions, and if the external conditions that are acts on that particular plant species, then these external factors like abiotic and biotic stress, which affects the plant growth, which affects the plant development and the productivity. So, external conditions that adversely affect the growth and development and the productivity of the plant, it is called as a stress. There are the number of scientists given the number of definitions of the stress. So, Smith et al. In 2010, he defined the stress as stressful environments, which are environments that are less than optimal for plant growth. So, in which this Smith et al. Says that the environments that are less than optimal for plant growth means that that is every individual requires that is a optimum environmental conditions, so optimum temperature, optimum water. So all organisms are having their optimum conditions for their environment. If there is a change into the optimal value or the optimum value such as temperature or the water availability, then they leads to the change into the change into the plant growth. So stressful environments, which are environments that are less than optimal for plant growth. So plants require, for example, plants requires that is the optimum temperature, that suppose that is the 35 degrees centigrade temperature is required for the optimum growth of the plant. But if there is a change in the optimum temperature, suppose there is the 60-degree or the 70-degree temperature, so suddenly there is a high temperature, or suppose there is the temperature less than the 35 degree, that is a 0 degree centigrade. So both these temperatures, that is a low temperature or the freezing temperature 0 degree centigrades, or the temperature above that is optimum, that is a 70 degree or the 60-degree temperature. So both these temperatures are having the effect on that is plant growth and development. So that's a particular environmental factors that are less than optimal for the plant growth, it is called as the stressful environments. Again, Tej and Jigal, 2010, he defined stress as A disadvantageous influence, a disadvantageous influence exerted on a plant by external abiotic and the biotic factors such as infection or heat, water, and anosmia. So stress is the disadvantageous effect on the plant growth, and this disadvantageous effect is caused due to the external abiotic and the biotic factors. 1980 Larcher, he defined stress as changes in physiology that occur when species are exposed to the extraordinary unfavorable conditions. So more or less that is all the definitions are the same. So what is the stress? Stress is nothing but that is the changes into the physiology or the biochemical biochemistry or the growth in that particular plant organism, and that change is due to the external environmental factors, and these external environmental factors, they may be the biotic factors or the abiotic factors. So that is called as a stress. And then what is the stress factor or the stressor? So the causal environmental factor responsible for plant stress, the causal environmental factor responsible for plant stress is called as stress factor, or it is called as a stressor or external constraint. So the environmental factor which is responsible for plant stress, it is called as a stress factor, stressor, or the external constraint. So which are the external environmental factors? There may be high temperature, low temperature. Biotic factors are there, different that is pest, insects attacks on the plants. Abiotic factors, water, drought, temperature, salinity. So there are a number of environmental conditions and that are responsible for the plant stress are called as the external constraint or the stressor or the stress factor. Then what is the stress response? Conversely, the result of exposure to a stressor, the result of exposure to a stressor is named the state of the stress or the stress response or simply stress. So external factor which are responsible for the stress, it is called as a stressor. Stressor may be biotic or the abiotic factor, and due to the effect of such stressor, the plants show some kind of the change in their growth, development, reproduction, or the morphology, and such change, resulting change due to the stressor, is called as a stress response. So what is meant by the stress response? The response which may be the molecular, cellular, or the organism in the physiology or the morphology of the plant, which is shown by the plant due to the particular kind of the stressor or the stress factor. That change is known as the stress response. So we understand that is three terminologies. There, first is a stress, stress factor, and stress response. Now, we frequently encounter that is the terms like acclimatization and the adaptation. So, what are this mean by the acclimatization adaptation? So, first we're dealing that is a acclimatization. So, acclimatation. What is meant by the acclimatation? Suppose that is individual plants responds to changes in the environment by directly altering their physiology and morphology to enhance survival and reproduction. And such responses require no new genetic modifications. No new genetic modification. Suppose in certain individual plants there is act a stress factor, and due to that stress factor, that plant showing that is a stress response, and this plant showing the stress response by directly altering their physiology. So they alter their physiology, they synthesize certain types of the enzymes, or they show that is a modify that is a morphology to enhance its survival during the unfavorable environmental conditions or that particular stress factor. But those changes in which not genetic modifications are involved, no new genetic modifications. So these changes are the physiological changes, biochemical changes, but not the genetical changes. Such modifications are known as the acclimation. And if the response of the individual plant, if the response of the individual plants improves with repeated exposure to the environment stress, then the response is termed as a acclimation. Acclimation represent a non-permanent change. So acclimatization is a non-permanent change in the physiology or morphology of the individual that can be reversed if the prevailing environmental conditions change. Suppose if any plant is are exposed to the extreme temperature, so that particular plant showing the response in terms of changing their physiology, so that plants can be survive in the that particular unfavorable environmental conditions. But when their temperature comes to the optimum, so that conditions are again reversed to its original conditions. So acclimation is not a permanent change, and acclimation does not involve the genetical change. Okay, so this is the acclimation. Then what is meaning by the adaptation? Adaptation, it is the epigenetic mechanism that alter the expression of the genes, that alter the expression of genes without changing the genetic code of an organism, and can extend the duration of acclimation responses and make them heritable. Suppose that particular plant they can be exposed to the such extreme environmental conditions, and these extreme environmental conditions they remain prolonged. So there is an epigenetic mechanism, that is epigenetic means that is a environment changes due to the environmental factors, so that alter the expression of genes. Certain genes are expressed out more, some genes are down regulated, so that change which is the heritable. So the change into the plant that is heritable, and such heritable change is known as the adaptations. When genetic changes in entire plant population have been fixed over many generations by selective environmental pressure, those changes are referred to as a adaptation. Okay, so are you understand? That is when suppose any plant they are exposed to the higher temperature and they are continuously exposing such a high temperature, then that plant undergoes the certain types of the changes, and that changes are heritable means they are passed on to the next generation, and such types of the heritable changes, then that particular changes is known as the adaptations. Then after seeing that is the different definitions, then what are the different types of the stress? So mostly there is a exogenous stresses. These exogenous stresses are classified into the biotic and the abiotic stresses. So most that is exogenous stress is classified into the biotic stress and the abiotic stress. So biotic stress means that is stress due to the living factors, and these are imposed by direct or indirect interactions with other organisms. And abiotic stress, which is originates from excess or deficit in the physical, chemical, and energetic conditions to which plants are exposed. So you remember that is the exogenous stress. There are the two types of the stress: biotic stress, that stress due to the living factors, and abiotic stress, that is the stress due to the non-living factors, and that's mainly changed to the physical change or the chemical change of that particular plant. So the biotic stresses are again are classified. into, that is this stress due to the infection of the certain pathogens, herbivory, and the competitions between the plant individuals. Abiotic stresses are again uh, classified into the temperature stress. There is a high temperature, then heat stress, low temperature, there is a cold stress, under there is a chilling stress or into the frost. Then water stress. If there isn't water scarcity, we call it as a drought. If there isn't higher water present, then it called as a flooding. Then there is a radiation stress. Then higher light intensity, low light intensity, ultraviolet radiations. Then the ionizing radiations. Chemical stress includes, that is a mineral salt, deficiency of the minerals, uh, either deficiency or the minerals present, that is in excess amount, that is oversupply of these particular minerals. Then pollutants such as the heavy metals or the pesticides. So heavy metals and pesticides also exert stress on that particular physiology and the growth and the reproduction of the plant. Then gases, toxins. So toxic gases is also a type of the chemical stress. Then the mechanical strain. So the stress is due to the wind, soil movement, or submergence. So these are the number of the stresses. So exogenous stress is the biotic stress and abiotic stress. Biotic stress is due to the living factors, abiotic stress into the non-living factors. Abiotic stress is again classified into the temperature, water, radiation, chemical, and the mechanical stress. So these are the different types of the stresses. So then, if that particular plant is exposed to such a type of the different number of stress conditions or the different number of the stress factors, stressors, or environmental constraint, then plants have to develop certain strategies to survive under such unfavorable environmental conditions. So how that particular plant survives and reproduce in stress conditions. So suppose there is a stress factor, there is a flooding, frost or acid soil is present. So plants is not able to reproduce in habitat the stress factor occurs in. Okay, so if there is a stress factor, certain plants they are not able to reproduce under such a stress factor. But that plants which are able to reproduce in habitat the stress factors occurs. These are called as either escape. So what is the escape? That is a plant restricts its activities to time periods free of the stress factor. So that particular plant escape from the stress conditions means suppose there is an in summer there is an the water stress, less availability of the water, so that particular plants escape such conditions, so that particular seeds remains dormant, or that plants uh, seeds germinate into the winter, they immediately produce the flowers and set the seeds. So such plants are called as escape when there is an when there is the favorable environmental conditions are present, they complete their life cycle in that favorable environmental conditions before the unfavorable environmental conditions comes. So that particular plants either escape such unfavorable environmental conditions or they develop the resistance. So resistance, that plants withstand the strain caused by the stress factor. So certain plants develop the resistance or they uh, withstand, that is the stress condition. So how they can withstand the stress condition? So there are the two types resistance. One is the avoidance. So plant possesses mechanism to reduce the strain caused by the stress factor. So plant possesses mechanism to reduce the strain caused by the stress factor. So certain plants showing that is avoidance of the factor. So there are the number of biochemical and physiological changes occurring to the plant. So avoid that particular conditions, or either it go for the tolerance. Tolerance means plant possesses mechanisms to cope with the strain caused by the stress factor. So this is known as a tolerance.